The Nevada sun hung low over the desert, painting the abandoned airbase in shades of rust and gold. Elara Ravencroft pushed her cleaning cart across the cracked tarmac, the wheels squeaking in rhythm with her steps. 68 years old, back aching, hands calloused from 15 years of mopping floors and scrubbing toilets. The wind carried sand across her path, the same wind that had blown across this forsaken place since the Cold War bunkers went dark decades ago. She wore the same blue janitor uniform she'd worn every day for the past 10 years. Beneath it, hidden where no one would look, she carried something else. Something that had survived longer than empires. A ceremonial knife, no longer than her palm, wrapped in cloth at her hip. The only piece of royalty she'd allowed herself to keep. The cart's wheel caught on a crack. Elara stopped, straightened, pressed her hand to the small of her back. Getting old, getting tired. Getting ready to finish her shift and return to the trailer she called home, where she would heat up soup and watch the news and wonder if tonight would be the night the dreams finally stopped. The dreams where she signed papers she couldn't remember signing, where her husband's face twisted in confusion, where their son screamed her name and fire consumed the royal palace. 15 years of the same dream. 15 years of waking in sweat-soaked sheets, reaching for a crown that no longer existed, and a family that was ash. She pushed the cart forward again. The sun dipped lower. Her shift would end in 30 minutes. Tomorrow she would return and do it all again, because this was her life now. This was her penance. That was when she heard the voices. Children's voices, speaking in Silvari, the language of her homeworld, a language she hadn't heard in a decade except in those terrible dreams. Alara's hand went to the knife without thinking. She abandoned the cart, moving toward the sound. It came from the old bunker complex on the eastern edge of the base, the section that had been sealed off since 2015, the section where security patrols never ventured because there was nothing worth protecting. The bunker door stood open, fresh scorch marks around the lock. Someone had burned through it. Inside, in the dim emergency lighting that somehow still functioned, 37 people huddled in the shadows. Silvari, all of them. She recognized the silver-white fur, the elongated ears, the amber eyes that caught and reflected light, women clutching children, elderly men leaning on makeshift canes. They wore travel clothes, dirty and torn, the kind refugees wore when they'd been running for a very long time. One of the children, a girl no more than 8 years old, looked up as Elara entered. The girl's eyes went wide. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed. The mother turned, stared. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then she dropped to one knee, then the others, all 37 of them, kneeling in that forgotten bunker, staring at the old woman in a janitor's uniform. The eldest among them, a woman whose fur had gone completely white with age, spoke in a trembling voice. "Your Majesty, we have searched for 15 years. The prophecy said you lived. The prophecy said you would return when your people needed you most." Alara's throat closed. She wanted to tell them they were wrong. She wanted to tell them she was just a janitor. Nobody special, nobody worth kneeling for. But the words wouldn't come because she recognized some of their faces. Minor nobles, palace staff, citizens she had sworn to protect back when she'd worn a crown instead of cleaning gloves. "I'm not," she started. The ground shook, a sound like thunder, but wrong, too sharp, too close. Everyone looked up. The bunker ceiling rained dust. The children screamed. Elara knew that sound. She'd heard it in the Gulf back in 1991, when she'd been 18 years old and wearing army medic fatigues instead of royal armor. That was the sound of ships landing. Military ships, the kind that didn't care about things like permission or mercy. She moved to the bunker entrance, looked out at the desert. 12 figures descended from the darkening sky. They wore armor that looked like it had been forged from volcanic rock, all sharp edges and cruel angles. Drachor raiders. She'd seen them in intelligence briefings, back when she'd been a queen who received such things. Reptilian species. Brutal. Efficient. They didn't take prisoners unless the prisoners were valuable, and they didn't leave witnesses. The lead raider was massive, twice her size, his armor decorated with tally marks. Kills. Hundreds of them. He saw her, smiled with too many teeth. "Little mammals hiding in holes," he said in rough galactic standard. "Come out. Make it easier. Make it. We will kill you quickly if you cooperate. Behind Alara, one of the children whimpered. She heard the mother try to quiet her, heard the desperate prayers being whispered to ancestors who couldn't help them now. She looked back at the 37 faces, saw the hope dying in their eyes. They traveled across the galaxy to find their lost queen, and they'd found an old woman with a mop. Alara reached under her uniform. Her fingers found the knife, found something else. A metal shaft collapsed down, no thicker than a baton. She pulled it free, gave it a sharp twist. The shaft extended with a sound like singing crystal. Segments locked into place, one after another, until she held a spear 7 feet long. The blade at its tip glowed faintly blue, even in the fading light. 300 years old, passed from her great-great-grandmother down through the generations, mother to daughter, queen to queen. She told herself for 15 years that she kept it only as a reminder of what she'd lost, what she'd destroyed with her own hands, even if she couldn't remember doing it. Now she understood. She kept it because somewhere deep down, beneath the guilt and the grief and the waking nightmares, she'd known this moment would come. Stay inside, she told the refugees. Her voice came out steady, cold, the voice of someone who'd given orders on battlefields. Lock the door behind me. If I don't come back, wait until dawn, then run south. There's a truck stop 12 miles that way. The owner's name is Frank. Tell him Ellie sent you. He'll help. Your Majesty, the old woman started. My name is Alara, just Alara, and I'm nobody's majesty anymore. She stepped out into the desert twilight. The door sealed behind her with a heavy clang. She heard the refugees pushing something against it, barricading themselves in. Good. Smart. The 12 Drachors spread out in a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. The big one, the leader with all those kill marks, stepped forward. His armor creaked with his movement. He carried a warhammer that looked like it could crack a tank. What is this? He gestured at her spear with amusement. An old woman with a stick. Are you the guard? Where are the warriors? I'm the only guard they need, Alara said. The Drachor laughed. The others joined in, a sound like stones grinding together. Then they attacked. 3 of them rushed her from different angles, trying to overwhelm her with numbers. Alara moved without thinking, her body remembering training that went deeper than conscious thought. She'd learned to fight in 2 wars. The first war had been on Earth, in the deserts of Iraq and Kuwait, where she'd carried wounded soldiers through gunfire and learned that sometimes the best way to save lives was to end threats quickly and efficiently. The second war had been on Salvary, where they'd trained her from childhood in the royal combat forms, the ancient techniques passed down for 1,000 years, designed for grace and precision and absolute lethality. She was old now. Her back ached. Her knees protested every sharp movement. But muscle memory didn't care about age. The spear sang. That was the only way to describe it. The crystal blade hummed as it cut through air, and the first raider who reached her learned too late that old didn't mean helpless. The blade found the gap between his armor plates, slipped through with surgical precision. He dropped without a sound. The second raider swung a curved blade at her head. Alara ducked, spun, brought the spear's shaft up to block. The weapons clashed with a shower of sparks. She twisted, used his momentum against him, and the crystal blade found his throat. The third raider was smarter. He grabbed the spear's shaft, tried to wrench it from her grip. He was stronger, much stronger. Alara let him pull her forward, then drove her knee into his midsection where the armor plates overlapped. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough. She ripped the spear free and swept his legs. When he fell, the blade was waiting. 9 left. They weren't laughing anymore. The big one, the leader, watched her with new interest. You move like a warrior. You hold that spear like someone who knows its weight. Who are you, old woman? Alara didn't answer. She was breathing hard, feeling the burn in her shoulders, the ache in her legs. 3 down, 9 to go. The math wasn't good. She wasn't 18 anymore, wasn't even 40. She was 68 years old, and every year pressed down on her like the weight of those 37 lives hiding behind her. But she'd held worse odds. In the Gulf, she'd carried a lieutenant twice her size out of a burning Humvee while taking small arms fire. She'd survived because she'd had no choice, because people were counting on her, because the alternative was unthinkable. Same as now. The Dracor leader gestured. 4 of his warriors circled to her flanks while the others spread out. Better tactics. They'd learned from their dead comrades' mistakes. "I know who you are," the leader said, his voice carrying across the desert. "I have seen your face in bounty notices. The Widow Queen, Alara Ravencroft, the one who murdered her own family and fled like a coward. There is a price on your head, Your Majesty. Not a large one. You have been forgotten. But I will claim it anyway." The words hit harder than any weapon. Murdered her own family. She wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that she didn't remember, that something had been wrong with her that day, that she would never have hurt them. But she'd spent 15 years reviewing what few memories remained, and they all pointed to the same conclusion. She had signed the execution orders. Her hand, her seal, her decision, even if she couldn't remember why. "My son's name was Theron," she said quietly. "Say it." The Dracor leader tilted his head, confused by the request. "Say his name," Alara repeated, her voice harder. "If you're going to mock his death, at least do him the honor of speaking his name." The leader smiled, sensing weakness. "Theron, the little prince. They say he died screaming for his mother while she watched. They say—" Alara moved, not with the controlled precision of before, but with raw fury, with 15 years of grief compressed into a single moment of crystallized rage. The spear became a blur. The Drachor leader barely got his warhammer up in time to block, and the impact sent shockwaves up both their arms. She pressed the attack, giving him no time to recover, no space to use his superior strength. The spear became an extension of her body, striking high and low, searching for openings, punishing every mistake. The leader gave ground, surprised by the ferocity, by the absolute absence of fear in the old woman's eyes. But he was young and she was old, and the other 8 Drachori were closing in. One of them grabbed her from behind. She drove her elbow back, felt armor crack, but his grip held. Another raider caught her spear shaft. They pulled in opposite directions, trying to tear the weapon from her hands, trying to immobilize her. The leader raised his warhammer, not for a clean kill, for a statement. He would crush her skull, and the refugees hiding in the bunker would hear it, and they would know their queen had failed them. The hammer came down. It struck the crystal spear dead center. 300 years of history shattered in an instant. The blade exploded into fragments of blue light, pieces spinning away into the desert like dying stars. The shaft broke, leaving Alara holding 2 pieces of useless wood. The Drachor holding her released his grip, laughing. They all laughed, stepping back to watch their leader finish it. Alara dropped the broken shaft. She reached for the knife at her hip, the ceremonial blade that was barely longer than her hand, pulled it free, held it up against the darkening sky. The Drachor leader looked at the tiny weapon, looked at her, shook his head with something almost like pity. "Brave little mammal," he said. "You will make a fine trophy. Your skull will look good on my wall." Alara whispered a prayer in the old language, words her mother had taught her, words queens spoke before their final battles. The prayer felt warm on her tongue, like a blessing from everyone who had carried that spear before her. She raised the knife, settled into a fighting stance that her knees protested but her spirit demanded. The first Drachor charged. That was when the sky exploded. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. The sky above the desert literally split open with light and thunder, in a roar that Alara felt in her bones. Something massive, something on fire, came screaming down through the atmosphere like a fallen star bent on revenge. Trees at the edge of the base snapped like toothpicks. The ground shook hard enough to knock everyone off their feet. A wave of superheated air washed over the clearing, making Alara's skin prickle, making her eyes water. The Drachor stumbled back, raising their arms against the sudden hurricane of heat and noise. When the dust settled, there was a crater where an old maintenance shed used to be. In the center of that crater sat something that looked like a coffin made of metal and defiance. An escape pod, its hull still glowing red-hot from atmospheric entry. Steam rose from its surface in columns. Warning lights blinked along its sides. Everyone stared. Alara, the Drachor. Even the desert itself seemed to hold its breath. One of the hatches blew open with a sharp bang. More steam poured out. A figure emerged, moving slowly like someone who'd just survived something no one should survive. He stood up fully, and Alara got her first clear look. Human, male, somewhere in his 30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of hard-earned muscle that came from military training. He wore armor that looked like it had been through a war, covered in scorch marks and dents. At his hip hung a weapon that hummed with a sound that made the hair on her neck stand up. The man looked around the clearing, took in the scene. The Drachor raiders, the old woman with her tiny knife, the bunker door with fresh scorch marks. He processed it all in about 3 seconds. Then he looked directly at Alara. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they were sharp. He saluted. "Your Majesty," he said in perfect galactic standard. "Sergeant Garrett Holloway, Terran Colonial Marines. Mind if I enter the fight?" The Dracor leader found his voice first. "What are you, human? This is not your battle." Garrett looked at him, looked at the other 8 Drachor, did some mental arithmetic. "Actually, I make it a point to help people who are fighting 12-to-1 odds, especially when they are protecting children." He raised his weapon and pointed it at the nearest raider. "The name's Garrett, and you gentlemen just made my bad day a lot more interesting." The raider laughed nervously. "We have never heard of such a species. You look weak." Garrett pulled the trigger. The sound was like reality breaking. A beam of blue-white plasma lanced out, so bright it left after images. The raider simply ceased to exist. One moment laughing, the next moment nothing but a scorch mark on the sand. 8-2 now, Garrett said. "Better odds for you guys, right?" The Drachor leader roared. "Kill him!" The remaining raiders charged, all of them, trying to overwhelm the human through sheer numbers. Garrett moved like water. 3 raiders came at him from different directions. He rolled behind debris from his crash pod. The raiders crashed into each other. Before they could untangle, his weapon spoke twice more. 2 more raiders became empty spaces filled with light. "No magic," Garrett called out. "Just good engineering. This fires plasma at 3% of light speed." He fired again. Another raider vanished. The remaining Drachor spread out, trying different tactics. But every time they thought they had him cornered, Garrett was somewhere else. He used the terrain like he'd studied it for years. Behind wreckage, between rocks, using the bunker wall as cover. Alara watched in fascination. She'd fought in 2 wars, but she'd never seen anything like this. The human fought with efficient brutality, every movement precise, every shot finding its mark. A raider tried to flank by climbing the bunker roof. Garrett looked up, smiled, adjusted his weapon. Instead of a focused beam, it fired a spread of smaller bolts. The raider fell with a thud. "Multiple firing modes," Garrett explained. "Really useful." The leader was desperate now. He barked orders. The remaining warriors charged in a straight line, hoping momentum would carry the day. Garrett stopped moving. He stood in the open and walked toward them. The raiders roared with triumph. Garrett pulled something small and round from his belt, threw it at the ground between them, covered his eyes. The explosion was blindingly bright. The raiders stumbled around, clawing at their eyes. Garrett walked through their confused ranks like he was strolling through a garden. His weapon spoke 4 more times. Quiet, efficient. When the light faded, only the leader remained. The big Drachor stood alone, warhammer clutched in shaking hands, yellow eyes darting for threats. Garrett reloaded his weapon. "Want to surrender? I promise you will be treated according to galactic conventions." The leader spat. "Drachor do not surrender to inferior species." "Inferior?" Garrett looked genuinely curious. "What makes you think we're inferior?" "You have no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. You are weak." Garrett nodded thoughtfully. "You know, people keep telling us that. Funny thing about being weak, though, it makes you really good at finding creative solutions." The leader charged. His warhammer came up. Garrett waited until the last second, then stepped aside like a dancer. The hammer smashed into the ground, sending up spray of rock. Before the leader could recover, Garrett grabbed a small cylinder from his belt, pressed it against the Drachor's neck. Squeezed. Electricity arced. The leader convulsed, then collapsed. Garrett stood over the unconscious raider, breathing hard but steady. He checked his weapon, looked around for more threats. His eyes found Alara. She was still holding her tiny knife. "That was some serious courage," Wayne said. "Going up against 12 of these guys with just a knife. That takes guts." Alara lowered the weapon. "I was going to die." "Maybe, but you were going to die fighting. That counts for something." He stopped a respectful distance away. Are there people in that bunker who need help? She nodded. How many? 37, mostly children and elders, some wounded. Garrett pulled out a small device. Static crackled. This is Holloway to Wanderer. Come in, Wanderer. A voice responded. Female, professional. Holloway, this is Wanderer. We've been tracking your descent. Are you intact? Intact and operational, Captain. I have 37 refugees here who need immediate medical attention and evacuation. Requesting pickup at my coordinates. Copy that. We're inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Garrett put the device away, looked at Alara, really looked at her. Waiters. The question came out sharp. Why would you help us? Garrett tilted his head, considering. Where I come from, we have a saying, evil wins when good people do nothing. These guys were evil. You were good people. The math seems simple. Alara stared at him. What kind of species are you? Garrett laughed, and for the first time he sounded young. Honestly, we're still trying to figure that out. Humanity's only been traveling between stars for about 70 years. Most of the galaxy thinks we're barbarians. Are you? He considered this. Depends who you ask. We fight when we have to. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We don't give up even when the odds are bad. Some folks find that barbaric. A sound like thunder rumbled overhead. A ship descended through the darkening sky, sleek and fast, moving with predatory grace. That's us, Garrett said. He walked over to the unconscious leader, slung him over his shoulder. We'll need to take this one for questioning. Intelligence says the Dretchor have been getting more aggressive. The ship settled in the clearing with barely a whisper. Landing gear extended. A ramp lowered. Alara felt hope for the first time in days, but also curiosity, fear. This human and his people were more than they appeared. And somewhere in the back of her mind, old instincts whispered warnings. Why had this random sergeant called her Your Majesty before asking her name? The Terran ship was nothing like what Alara had expected. From the outside, it looked military, all smooth lines and matte black hull. But once Garrett led her and the 37 refugees aboard, she found herself in a space that felt more like home than warship. The corridors were wide and well lit, with soft carpeting. The walls displayed images of Earth landscapes that moved gently with simulated wind. The air smelled clean, with a hint of pine trees. Medical bay is this way, Garrett said, leading injured refugees down a corridor lined with family photos. Crew members and loved ones, smiling faces frozen in joy. The medical bay was spotless. A woman in a white coat looked up as they entered. Mid-40s, auburn hair pulled back, sharp green eyes that assessed the refugees with professional efficiency. What do we have, Sergeant? She asked, already moving toward the most seriously injured. 12 Dratchor raiders hit their settlement, Garrett replied. These folks have been hiding for 2 days. Dehydration, cuts, bruises, couple of broken bones. Nothing critical, but they've been through hell. The doctor examined an elderly male with a broken arm. We'll have them fixed up in no time. She looked at Alara. Are you injured, ma'am? Alara shook her head. Her shoulder ached where a blade had grazed her, but it was nothing. Good, Sergeant, the captain wants to see you on the bridge. Garrett turned to Alara. Want to come along? She followed him through corridors, past rooms filled with humans working. They greeted Garrett with waves and jokes about his crash landing. Some stared at her with friendly curiosity. How many of you are on this ship? She asked. 43 crew, plus your folks now. We're a scout ship. Our job is to explore, make contact with other species, gather intelligence. Is that what you were doing when you found us? More or less, we were mapping this system when sensors picked up Dretchor ship signatures. Captain decided to investigate. Good thing we did. The bridge was smaller than expected, with only a handful of humans at control stations. The walls showed space around them, stars and planets hanging in the void. A woman turned to greet them. Early 50s, short gray hair, lines around her eyes from years of difficult decisions. She wore the same uniform as others, but the crew's deference made clear she was in command. Sergeant Holloway, she said, good work down there. Casualty report? No friendly casualties, Captain Rodriguez. All refugees aboard and receiving medical attention. 1 prisoner secured. Excellent. The captain turned to Alara and extended her hand. I'm Captain Elena Rodriguez, commanding officer of the UES Wanderer. You must be Queen Alara Ravencroft. Alara clasped the offered hand, hiding her shock. They knew. That explained Garrett's salute. I haven't been a queen in 15 years, she said carefully. Maybe not officially, Rodriguez replied, but those 37 people in Medical Bay disagree. Alara had no response. The captain gestured to the tactical display. I understand your people were attacked by Drachor raiders. Can you tell me more? They came 3 days ago. 12 of them, maybe more. Attacked a Silvari refugee settlement 40 miles from where I work. Killed many. The survivors fled to the bunker. Rodriguez nodded grimly. How many ships did the raiders have? 3 small attack vessels. Maybe 40 raiders total. The captain exchanged glances with Garrett. Something passed between them. That's much larger than usual for Drachore raids in this sector, Rodriguez said. They typically operate in groups of 5 or 6. A young man at a control station looked up. Captain, I'm picking up Drachor communication traffic about 60 light minutes out. Sounds like fleet movements. Show me. The main display changed to show a tactical map. Red dots appeared in several locations, far more than Alara expected. Someone whispered a curse. Garrett stepped closer. Captain, that looks like a full invasion force. Agreed. Communications. Try to raise the Galactic Council. Priority 1 message. Alara stared at the red dots. Hundreds. Thousands. What do they want? Rodriguez turned to her. What can you tell us about Drachor expansion patterns? Have they been moving into this sector gradually? They've been raiding border worlds for the past year. Small attacks mostly. The council said they were testing defenses. Nothing like this. The council was wrong, Garrett said flatly. This isn't a test. This is the real thing. The communications officer looked up, face pale. Captain, I have the Galactic Council on subspace. They're refusing our priority request. They'll review our report in the next standard meeting cycle. When is that? 3 weeks from now. Silence. Alara felt cold understanding. 3 weeks. The Drachore would reach Silvari homeworld in days. What about your own military? Rodriguez asked. Can the Silvari fleet mount a defense? Alara thought of the ships she'd reviewed in her last year as queen. We have 37 ships. Good ships, but not enough. What about evacuation? The council has ordered the Silvari government to prepare for an honorable last stand. They say retreat would dishonor our ancestors. Garrett made a sound like a growl. Honor doesn't stop plasma fire. Rodriguez was studying the display with predatory intensity. How long until they reach inhabited systems? The navigation officer checked his instruments. First colonies in 48 hours, Silvari homeworld in 5 days. And the nearest council fleet, 2 weeks out minimum. The captain was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she turned to her communications officer. Send a message to Colonial Command. Full tactical report, highest priority. Tell them we're requesting immediate deployment of Task Force 7 under Protocol Omega. The officer looked surprised. Ma'am, Protocol Omega requires authorization from... I know what it requires. Send the message. Garrett straightened. Captain, are you sure? Protocol Omega is pretty extreme. Rodriguez looked at the display showing 40,000 Drachor ships. 40,000 raiders heading for civilian populations. I think extreme is exactly what we need. Alara looked between them. What is Protocol Omega? Rodriguez smiled coldly. Something we learned from our own history. Sometimes the best defense is making the enemy regret they ever found you. The communications officer looked up. Message sent. Colonial Command is requesting confirmation of threat assessment. Send them everything. Full sensor logs, prisoner interrogation reports, the works. She turned to Alara. In the meantime, we need to learn everything we can about Drachor tactics. You fought them before. Would you be willing to help? Alara thought of her village burning, of her broken spear, of 37 people alive because a human decided strangers were worth saving. Yes, I'll help however I can. Good. Because if this works, you're about to see what humans do when someone threatens innocent people. The Drachor chieftain was larger under bright lights. Alara stood outside the holding cell, watching Kraga through the transparent barrier. Without his warhammer, he still looked dangerous. Yellow eyes tracked every movement with predatory intelligence. His name is Kragoth the Render, she told Garrett. Among the Drachor, such names must be earned through great violence. Garrett checked a translation device on his collar. What can you tell me about their command structure? They follow strength above all. The strongest leads, the weak serve or die. But they're not stupid. Cunning is valued as much as power. Good to know. Garrett started toward the cell, then paused. Your Majesty, would you like to conduct this interrogation? You've dealt with Drachor before. Alara blinked, surprised. Yes, I would. The cell's communication system activated. Alara stepped forward. Kragoth, I am Queen Alara Ravencroft of Silvari. I have questions. The chieftain sneered. I will tell you nothing, soft skin. Actually, you've already told us plenty. Your ship's communication logs were very informative. We know about the fleet movements, the invasion timeline, the target list. Kragoth's expression flickered. Surprise. Your encryption codes are about 50 years behind Terran standards. We cracked them in 20 minutes. That was a lie, but the important thing was making him believe it. What I don't understand is the timing, she continued conversationally. Why now? The Drachor have been content with small raids for decades. What changed? Kragoth remained silent, but she could see the war behind his eyes. Pride made species talkative. You will learn soon enough, he finally said. When the Great Fleet arrives, all the soft peoples will kneel or burn. The Great Fleet? That would be the force gathering at Kairos, right? About 40,000 ships. This time Kragoth couldn't hide his shock. How do you know about Kairos? Alara didn't answer. She let the silence stretch. Let him imagine vast intelligence networks. She tried a different approach. You know, Kragoth, I've been studying your species. Fascinating culture, very direct, very honest. When a Drachor wants something, he takes it. No deception, no politics. Just strength against strength. The chieftain straightened slightly, pleased. But this invasion plan has politics written all over it. Coordinated timing, strategic targets, careful resource allocation. That doesn't sound like traditional Drachor thinking. You know nothing of our ways, Kragoth growled, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Maybe not, but I know what it looks like when someone else is pulling the strings. Who convinced your leaders to launch this invasion? Because I don't think it was their idea. For a moment, the chieftain looked vulnerable. Then his expression hardened. The empire grows strong. We take what we wish. That is our way. Alara sighed. All right, have it your way. She turned toward the door, paused. Oh, one more thing. You might want to warn your fleet. Tell them to stay away from human space. Kragoth laughed harshly. Your species is unknown. You have no space worth avoiding. Actually, Garrett said, we have quite a bit. 73 colony worlds, 16 major trade routes, about 300 research stations. Most people don't know because we keep a low profile. But if your people threaten our neighbors, he let the sentence hang. You threaten us? You are one ship. We are 40,000. Numbers don't always tell the whole story, Garrett said mildly. Just ask the 12 raiders who attacked that bunker. As they left, Alara said, he was frightened at the end. Did you notice? Garrett looked pleased. Good eye. Something about human space really spooked him. Are you? Alara asked. Just one ship? Garrett smiled but didn't answer. Before she could press, Rodriguez's voice echoed through the ship. All hands to stations. We have incoming priority traffic from Colonial Command. The bridge was buzzing when they arrived. Every station occupied, the main display showing complex tactical data. Rodriguez looked up. Sergeant, perfect timing. Colonial Command just authorized Protocol Omega. Task Force 7 is moving to intercept. How many ships? Garrett asked. Officially, 12 vessels on patrol in this sector. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Officially? Rodriguez's smile was predatory. Officially, the other 130 ships are conducting routine training exercises. Pure coincidence they're armed with our latest experimental weapons. Alara stared as new symbols appeared on the display. Human ships, dozens of them, moving toward Drachori positions, 42, 61, 89, 112. 142 ships, she whispered. But I thought humans were a new species. We've been building ships longer than we've been traveling between stars, Rodriguez explained. When we developed FTL 70 years ago, we had a lot of hulls ready to convert. Garrett studied the fleet movements. What's the plan, Captain? Asymmetric warfare doctrine, full implementation. We hit their supply lines first, then communications, then command structure. By the time they figure out what's happening, they'll be fighting blind and hungry. What about the colonies they're heading for? Alara asked. Evacuation is already underway. Every civilian transport in the sector is converging on threatened worlds. We'll have most of the population out before the Drashor arrive. Alara felt hope surge, then confusion. But the council said evacuation was impossible. Too many people, not enough ships. Rodriguez and Garrett exchanged looks. The council was thinking about official transport vessels, the captain said carefully. Humans think outside official channels. When we put out the call, every cargo hauler, passenger liner, and private yacht within 3 systems volunteered. The communications officer looked up. Captain, we're receiving tactical updates. Admiral Blackwood sends his regards and asks if you need additional support. Garrett straightened. Admiral Blackwood is my grandfather. He commanded the defense of New Terra during the First Contact War. If anyone can handle a Drachor invasion, it's him. First Contact War? Alara asked. Long story. Let's just say humanity's introduction to galactic politics wasn't peaceful. We learned hard lessons, lost good people, but we survived, and we learned how to fight smart instead of fair. On the screen, the tactical situation evolved rapidly. Human ships moved into position throughout the sector, not to meet the Drachor head-on, but to control key strategic points. Supply depots, communication relays, navigation beacons. They're not going to fight them directly, Alara realized. Humans rarely fight fair when lives are at stake, Rodriguez confirmed. We learned that the best way to win a war is to make sure the other side can't fight properly, can't communicate, can't coordinate, can't resupply, can't sustain operations, can't navigate, can't find targets. She turned to Alara. Your people think in terms of honorable combat. Ship against ship, warrior against warrior. But humans? We think in terms of systems. Break the system, and the warriors don't matter. Watching the fleet deploy, Alara understood she'd seriously underestimated these aliens. They weren't just warriors or explorers. They were strategists on a scale she'd never imagined. A soft chime from her pocket. She pulled out the communicator Garrett had given her. Dr. Winter's face appeared. Your Majesty, could you come to Medical Bay? There's something you need to see. The concern in the doctor's voice made Alara's stomach tighten. Is someone hurt? No, but I found something during your examination. Something important. Alara excused herself and made her way to Medical Bay. The refugees were settled, children sleeping in comfortable beds. Dr. Winters waited in her office. Medical charts covered the walls. On her desk, a holographic display showed scan results. Please sit. The doctor's expression was serious. What did you find? Winters manipulated the display. An image appeared showing a cross-section of a neck, Alara's neck. When I examined your shoulder wound, I noticed this. She pointed to a small mark at the base of Alara's skull. It looked like a surgical scar. Very old, very faint. I ran scans. She zoomed in. There, embedded in tissue, was something that didn't belong. A small device, no larger than a grain of rice, with filaments extending into neural tissue. That's a hegemony neural implant, Winters said quietly. It's dormant now, but based on tissue growth patterns, it was active for years, possibly decades. Alara stared at the image. What does it do? Mind control. The hegemony developed these about 60 years ago. They plant them in key individuals, political leaders, military commanders, anyone with influence. Then they manipulate their decisions, alter their perceptions, even control their actions directly. The room tilted. Alara gripped the chair arms. How long? She whispered. Winters checked her data. Based on scar tissue and integration patterns, it was implanted at least 20 years ago. It went dormant approximately 15 years ago. 20 years. 15 years. The numbers aligned with horrible precision. Alara's hand went to her neck. The coup. The day I lost everything, that was 15 years ago. I'm sorry, I know this must be difficult. Difficult. Alara felt like she was drowning, 20 years compromised, 20 years of decisions she thought were her own. And 15 years ago, when the chip went dormant, what had she done in those final moments? What orders had she given? Your Majesty? Winters leaned forward. Are you all right? Alara wasn't all right, would never be all right, but she nodded anyway. Thank you for telling me. Does anyone else know? Captain Rodriguez, Sergeant Holloway, I felt they needed to be informed. Security implications. Right. Because a queen with a mind control chip was a risk, even if dormant. Alara stood. The room swayed. I need to be alone. Of course. Alara left the medical bay, walking through corridors that suddenly felt foreign. Her mind was 15 years in the past, replaying memories that might not be real, trying to separate her choices from those implanted by a device the size of a grain of rice. She found an empty observation room with a viewport looking at stars. Sat in darkness, watching the universe spin past. She had killed her family. She had signed the orders, given the commands, set in motion the events that led to the palace explosion. And she'd done it while someone else controlled her mind. 15 years of guilt. 15 years of believing she was a monster. And now the truth was worse. She wasn't a monster. She was a puppet, a weapon someone else had pointed at her own family and fired. The door opened. Garrett. She didn't turn around. Dr. Winters told me you'd be here, he said quietly. Go away. Can't do that, ma'am. That's an order. With respect, Your Majesty, you stopped being my commanding officer 15 years before I was born. And even if you were, I'd still disobey. Silence. Alara kept her eyes on the stars. It wasn't your fault, Garrett said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Dr. Winters showed me the scans, explained how those implants work. When they're active, you're not yourself. You're a passenger watching through a window while someone else drives. The person who killed your family wasn't you. It was whoever held the remote. My hands signed the orders. Your hands, your voice, not your will, not your choice. He turned to face her. If someone hijacks a car and runs people over, we don't blame the car. We blame the hijacker. Alara finally looked at him. I should have known, should have felt something wrong. 20 years I had that thing in my head, and I never knew. Because you were supposed to never know. That's the point. It's insidious, evil. His jaw tightened. And we're going to make sure the people responsible pay. How? The chip is dormant. We don't know who controlled it. Not yet, but we have Kragath. We have Drachori communication logs. We have 40,000 enemy ships about to walk into the biggest surprise of their lives. We'll find answers. Alara turned back to the viewport. Out there, the Drachor fleet was moving. Thousands of ships convinced they were strong enough to take whatever they wanted. They had no idea they were pawns, just like she'd been. Garrett, tell me about Protocol Omega. He was silent for a moment. It's our contingency plan for existential threats. When humanity faces something that could wipe us out, or when our allies face that threat, we throw everything at the problem. No holds barred. No rules except win. Sounds extreme. It is. That's the point. My grandfather helped write it after the First Contact War. We almost lost Earth. We survived by the skin of our teeth, and we swore we'd never be that vulnerable again. So we built contingencies. Ships we kept hidden, weapons we kept secret, all waiting for the day we'd need it. And today is that day. Today is that day. Alara closed her eyes, thought about 37 refugees who'd searched 15 years. Thought about a chieftain taking orders from someone else. Thought about 40,000 ships heading toward innocence. Thought about a grain of rice device that had stolen 20 years of her life. When she opened her eyes, something had changed. The guilt was still there. The grief was still there, but underneath, burning hot and fierce, was something else. Anger. Purpose. She'd spent 15 years running, 15 years hiding, 15 years believing she was a monster. But she wasn't a monster. She was a victim. And more, she was a survivor, a warrior, a medic who'd saved lives in 2 wars, a queen who'd once led her people before invisible chains turned her into something else. The chains were broken now. The puppet strings were cut. "Garrett," she said, "take me back to the bridge. I want to help plan this operation." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." As they walked back, Alara felt something she hadn't felt in 15 years. Not quite hope, not quite peace, but close enough. She was done being someone else's weapon. It was time to be her own. The war began not with great battles, but with small disasters that struck the Drawshore fleet like invisible lightning. Alara watched from the bridge as the tactical display updated in real time. The massive invasion force was showing signs of confusion. Supply convoys went missing. Communication relays stopped responding. Navigation beacons gave false readings that sent ships to empty space. Phase 1 complete, the communications officer reported. All Drawshore supply lines severed. Casualties minimal on our side. Rodriguez nodded. They're reporting significant losses, but mostly from confusion. They're running into each other, burning fuel they can't replace. Alara stood beside her, studying the chaos. On screen, a Drawshore battle group circled endlessly, clearly lost. Another group had stopped entirely, waiting for supply ships that would never come. "But they outnumber you 40 to 1, she said. "Eventually they'll adapt." "Eventually, yes," Rodriguez agreed. "That's why we don't give them time." The display changed. New signals appeared throughout Drawshore positions. Human ships, dozens of them, materializing from what had seemed empty space. "Stealth fields disengaging," the navigation officer reported. "All strike teams in position." "Stealth fields?" Alara asked. "Human technology," Garrett explained. "We bend light and sensor waves around our ships. Makes us invisible until we want to be seen." The attack began simultaneously across 12 locations. But these weren't massive ship battles. Small human vessels darted in and out like hunting insects, targeting specific systems with surgical precision. "Command ship and Alpha Group reporting total communication failure," the officer announced. "Beta Group requesting assistance. Multiple ships in Gamma Group reporting navigation malfunctions." Rodriguez studied the reports with satisfaction. They're not trying to destroy ships. They're disabling them. "Dead ships can't retreat and warn the fleet," Garrett explained. "Disabled ships can be captured, crews interrogated, databases cracked." As hours passed, the pattern became clear. The humans weren't fighting a war of conquest. They were fighting a war of information and control. Every action gathered intelligence while denying it to the enemy. The breakthrough came when a human strike team captured a Drawshore command vessel. Within minutes, Terran specialists had cracked databases and downloaded terabytes of strategic information. "Captain," the communications officer said, voice tight with excitement, "Admiral Blackwood is requesting immediate conference, Priority Alpha." The screen changed to show a weathered face that looked like an older Garrett. Admiral Sterling Blackwood had the same gray eyes, but where Garrett looked confident, the Admiral looked absolutely certain. "Captain Rodriguez," he said without preamble, "we have a problem. The intelligence we captured changes everything." "What did you find, sir?" "The Drawshore aren't the real threat. They're being manipulated by a species called the hegemony, advanced tech, total ruthlessness, and a policy of using other species as weapons before moving in themselves." The words hit Alara like a blow. Hegemony, the same species that had put a chip in her head. "You're saying this invasion is just a probe?" Rodriguez asked. "Worse, the hegemony has been orchestrating conflicts throughout this sector for 50 years. They let other species fight and destroy each other. Then they move in to claim the ruins. The Drawshore invasion is just the latest example." Alara felt cold understanding. The border raids, the increasing aggression. Someone has been pushing the Drawshore toward this. "Exactly." Blackwood's expression was grim. "And according to intelligence, the hegemony fleet is already moving into position to claim this sector once the Drawshore finish destroying current inhabitants. They're planning to harvest everyone. Silvari, Drawshore, everyone." Garrett stepped forward. "What are our orders, sir?" Blackwood smiled without humor. "The hegemony thinks they're clever. They think they can use other species as tools and discard them when done. They've never dealt with humans. Time to give them an education." The plan Blackwood outlined was ambitious. The humans wouldn't simply defeat the Drawshore invasion. They would turn it around and use it as a weapon against the hegemony. Phase 2 begins in 6 hours, the Admiral announced. All human vessels will converge on the Drakshor flagship. We're going to have a conversation with Emperor Thraxus. As the connection ended, Alara turned to Rodriguez. You are going to negotiate? Not exactly. We're going to offer them a choice. Keep being someone else's weapon, or join us in destroying the hand that's been wielding them. The assault on the Drakshor flagship was unlike anything in galactic warfare records. Instead of trying to destroy the massive vessel, the human fleet surrounded it and waited. When the Drakshor launched fighters, human ships disabled them without casualties. When the flagship tried to escape, human vessels blocked every route. Finally, Admiral Blackwood himself led a boarding party to the flagship's bridge. The conversation was broadcast throughout both fleets. Alara listened as the Admiral calmly explained to Emperor Thraxus how his people had been manipulated. You think you're expanding your empire, Blackwood said, but you're just clearing the way for masters who see you as expendable tools. When you've finished killing the Sylvari, the hegemony will kill you. That's their pattern. That's what they've done to 40 other species in 50 years. The Emperor's response was aggressive, full of bluster. But Blackwood came prepared. He presented evidence from hegemony databases, communication intercepts showing manipulation, tactical analyses proving the Emperor's own advisors worked for the enemy, financial records showing payment in technology that came with kill switches. The moment of truth came when Blackwood made his offer. We can destroy your fleet. Our technology is efficient. Our will is certain. But we don't want to. We want you to help us destroy the real enemy. The species that's been treating you like puppets. The species that planned to exterminate you the moment you finish their dirty work. Why should the Drakshor trust humans? Thraxus demanded. Blackwood's answer was typically human. Because we're the only ones who bothered to tell you the truth. Because we could have killed you all and chose not to. Because right now, somewhere in the hegemony fleet heading this way, there's a file with your name and an execution date. We're offering you a chance to write a different ending. The silence stretched forever. Alara held her breath. Then Thraxus spoke. Show me this evidence. All of it. If what you say is true, if my people have been deceived, then the hegemony will learn why we are called the warriors of the fire planets. The alliance that followed was born of pragmatism, not friendship. But it was effective. The Drakshor fleet, instead of invading Sylvari space, turned toward hegemony staging areas. Combined with human forces, they represented power that caught the hegemony by surprise. When hegemony ships arrived expecting a devastated sector, they found a combined fleet waiting. The battle lasted 3 days and ended with complete destruction of the hegemony expeditionary force. But victory came with costs. Alara watched from Wanderer's medical bay as wounded poured in. Human casualties, Drakshor casualties, civilian casualties from colonies not fully evacuated in time. She worked alongside Dr. Winters and medical staff, her training from the Gulf and her years as royal surgeon returning with automatic precision. Her hands moved with practiced ease, treating burns, setting bones, stopping bleeding. A human lieutenant with plasma burns, a Drakshor warrior with collapsed lung, a Sylvari child caught in crossfire, shrapnel in her shoulder. You're very good at this, Winters said during a brief pause. Both natural talent and extensive training, Alara said, not looking up from her suture. In our culture, royalty must know how to heal as well as hurt, must know how to preserve life as well as take it. A wise philosophy. One I forgot for 15 years. A commotion at the entrance. Garrett was there, supporting a Drakshor who looked vaguely familiar. It took Alara a moment to recognize him. Kragath, the chieftain who'd led the raid on the bunker. But he looked different, older, tired. His armor was scorched black. He's wounded, Garrett said. Took plasma bolt to the side protecting one of our boarding teams. Refused treatment until his warriors were cared for. Kragath's yellow eyes found Alara. The Widow Queen, how fitting. You will let me die, yes? For what I did to your people. Alara moved to his side, assessing the wound. Bad. 3rd-degree burns, possible internal damage. He needed surgery immediately. I'm going to save your life. Lie down. Why? The question was barely a whisper. I would have killed you. Killed all of them. Because a good medic doesn't choose patience. Because you were being used, just like I was. Because today you chose to fight the right enemy, and that deserves to be honored. She worked on him for 2 hours. Winters assisted, along with a Dratshore surgeon seconded to Wanderer as part of the alliance. They saved his life. When Kragath woke in recovery, the first thing he saw was Alara sitting beside his bed, checking monitors. "You should have let me die," he said. "I deserve to die. Maybe but that's not for me to decide. You get to live, Kragath. What you do with that life is up to you." The final battle against the hegemony came on the third day. Blackwood's strategy had been simple. Draw the hegemony fleet into what appeared to be a trap for the human Drakor alliance. Let them think they had the advantage. Then spring the real trap. Alara watched from the bridge as the hegemony dreadnought, a vessel 3 times larger than any other ship in the sector, positioned itself at Formation Center. That was the commanded ship. That was where the hegemony overlord would be. That was the target. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, turning to Alara, "we need someone to lead the boarding party, someone who understands hegemony technology, someone with personal experience with their methods." Alara understood immediately. The chip in her head, the years of manipulation. She was the key to understanding how the hegemony operated. "I'll do it," she said. Garrett immediately protested. "Your Majesty, this is high-risk combat. We have trained operators." "You have operators who've never been inside a hegemony neural network," Alara interrupted. "I have, for 20 years. I know how they think, how they operate, how they see the universe. I'm your best chance at shutting down their command structure quickly enough to save the slaves aboard that dreadnought." Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Gear up. You leave in 30 minutes. The boarding party consisted of 12 people, 4 human Marines, 4 Drashor shock troops, 3 Silvari intelligence officers, and Alara. They launched in a stealth shuttle, cutting through the chaos with precision piloting. The hegemony dreadnought loomed like a mountain made of metal and malice. Guns bristled from every surface. Shields flickered with absorbed energy. But shields were designed to stop large weapons, not small infiltration craft. They docked on a maintenance airlock Silvari intelligence had identified as lightly guarded. The airlock opened with a hiss. Alara stepped through first, plasma pistol in hand. The corridor beyond was dark, lit only by pulsing red emergency lighting. "Follow me," she said. "I know where the main control center is." "How?" one of the Marines asked. "Because I've been dreaming about this ship for 15 years. I thought they were nightmares. Now I realize they were memories the chip recorded before going dormant." They moved through corridors like ghosts. When they encountered guards, they struck fast and silent. Drachor's strength combined with human tactics and Silvari precision. Brutally effective. The control center was exactly where Alara remembered, a massive chamber filled with screens and terminals, dozens of hegemony technicians monitoring thousands of neural implants across the galaxy. And at the center, on a raised platform, stood the Overlord. He was smaller than expected. Humanoid, but not quite human. Too thin. Too tall. Skin that looked like it had never seen natural sunlight. And his eyes. His eyes were the worst. They looked dead. Empty. "Experiment 1, he said, his voice carrying strange harmonics. "We've been monitoring your progress. You've exceeded all expectations. Breaking free of the chip. Organizing resistance. Leading warriors. You were our greatest success." Alara raised her weapon. "Your greatest failure. I'm ending this." "Are you?" The Overlord smiled like a corpse remembering happiness. "The chip in your head was never removed, Alara. It was only sleeping, waiting for this moment, for when you'd be close enough that dormant protocols could be reactivated." He raised his hand, made a crushing gesture. Pain exploded through Alara's skull. The chip. Activating. She felt her muscles lock, felt her consciousness being pushed aside, felt invisible hands reaching into her mind and taking control. No, not again. Not after everything. She fought. God, how she fought. But the chip was designed by a species that had perfected mind control over centuries. Too strong, too invasive. She felt her hand raising the weapon, turning it toward Garrett and the others. "Your Majesty!" Garrett shouted. "Fight it!" She was fighting. She was fighting with everything she had, but it wasn't enough. Then she heard Winter's voice through her comm. Ma'am, the chip is in your motor cortex, left hemisphere. You can self-destruct it, but you'll lose mobility in your left arm permanently. You need to fight from inside. Override the motor commands. Force your body to do what you want. Force her body, override the chip. She was a passenger watching helplessly as invisible hands puppeteered her flesh. But she was also a combat medic with decades of experience. She knew human anatomy. She knew cell physiology. She knew exactly where that chip was and exactly what it would take to destroy it. Flashbacks crashed through her consciousness. Her son's face on his 5th birthday, her husband laughing, the first time she'd saved a life in the Gulf, blood on her hands and a soldier's grateful eyes. 15 years mopping floors and believing she was a monster. 37 refugees kneeling in a bunker. A child clinging to her in medical bay. Garrett saying, "You were going to die fighting, and that counts for something." She remembered who she was. Not Experiment 1, not a puppet, not a weapon. Alara Ravencroft. Queen, soldier, medic, survivor. Her left hand, the one not holding the weapon, moved with agonizing slowness, fighting the chip's control every millimeter. Her fingers found the ceremonial knife at her hip, the same knife she'd pulled in the desert when her spear broke, the same knife that had survived 300 years. She pulled it free, raised it to her own neck. The chip screamed in her mind, throwing every override it had, trying to stop her from destroying it. But she was stronger. She had always been stronger. She just hadn't known it. The blade bit into the back of her neck. Blood ran hot down her spine. The chip sparked, died, its filaments severing as the knife found its mark. The pain was incredible, worse than anything she'd experienced. But the invisible hands released their grip. She was free. Alara stumbled forward, her left arm hanging useless. The knife clattering behind her blood soaked her collar. But her right hand still held the plasma pistol, and the pistol was still pointed at the Overlord. "A good medic knows," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "Sometimes you have to cut to cure." The Overlord's expression shifted. For the first time, something like fear appeared in those dead eyes. Impossible. The chip's security protocols were designed to control someone who didn't know they were being controlled. I knew, and I chose to cut myself free rather than be your weapon again. She pulled the trigger. The plasma bolt hit the Overlord's center mass. He died instantly. Chaos erupted in the control center. Hegemony technicians scrambled for weapons. The boarding party opened fire. The battle was brief and brutal. When it ended, every Hegemony controller lay dead or dying. Garrett reached Alara as she collapsed, her left arm completely limp, blood loss making her vision swim. "Medic!" he shouted. "We need a medic!" "I am a medic," Alara said faintly, "and I know exactly how bad this is. Going to need surgery, several hours, might lose the arm entirely." "Stay with me," Garrett ordered. "That's an order from a lower-ranking officer, which doesn't make sense, but stay with me anyway." "Not planning on dying? Not after all this." The master control system was easily destroyed. With the Overlord dead and control center compromised, the Hegemony fleet began to disintegrate. Across dozens of ships, thousands of slaves woke from mind control to find themselves in the middle of battle. Some panicked, some surrendered, some, filled with rage at what had been done to them, turned on their former masters. The battle ended not with a grand explosion, but with a whimper. Hegemony forces scattered, broken, leaderless. Those who could run, ran, those who couldn't surrendered, and those who'd been enslaved for years stood in shocked silence as invisible chains fell away. Alara woke in medical bay 3 days later. Dr. Winters was there, checking monitors with focused expression. "My arm?" Alara asked. "You still have it. Functionality is about 40%, and that's with extensive nerve grafting. The chip did significant damage when you destroyed it, but you're alive, and you're free." Alara looked at her left hand, tried to move the fingers. They twitched slightly, responding with frustrating slowness. But they responded. That was something. "The chip?" "Removed entirely, I made sure. Every piece, analyzed and documented. We're using the data to identify and remove chips from other slaves we rescued." "How many?" 8,347 so far. We're still processing prisoners and refugees. The number keeps growing. 8,000 lives freed from invisible chains. It didn't erase what Alara had lost, didn't bring back her husband or her son, but it was something. It was purpose. It was meaning. 6 months later, Alara stood on the balcony of the Silvari Royal Palace, looking out over a city slowly rebuilding. The coup government had fallen once a truth about hegemony manipulation came to light. Parliament had been reformed, elections held, and they'd offered her the crown. She'd accepted, with conditions. Constitutional monarchy, she'd told them. I'm not ruling alone, never again. You'll elect a prime minister who handles day-to-day governance. I'll serve as head of state and chief medical officer. I'll be the medic queen, not the warrior queen. And if you ever think I'm being controlled again, you have my permission to remove me by any means necessary. Prime Minister Vex Corvin, formally pardoned and elected by popular vote, stood beside her now. He was older, grayer, carrying the weight of 15 years spent believing he'd betrayed everything he loved. But he was alive, and he was free, and he was trying to rebuild what the hegemony had nearly destroyed. The Scar Alliance delegation arrived this morning, he said. Representatives from 40 species, all freed from hegemony control. They're all looking for leadership. Then we lead. Sci-Fi who baited, Alara said. Not by conquest, not by force, but by example. By showing them that being broken doesn't mean being defeated. A shuttle landed in the palace courtyard. Alara watched as Garrett emerged, now Captain Holloway, commander of Wanderer's sister ship. He wasn't alone. A young man walked beside him, early 40s with the bearing of someone who'd spent years helping people. He wore a paramedic's uniform from Tucson, Arizona. Prince Theron Ravencroft, her son, alive, looking up at the palace with eyes that matched her own. Vex had kept him safe, hidden him on Earth under a false identity, raised him to be a healer, not a warrior, protected him from hegemony's reach until the threat was finally eliminated. Alara's knees went weak. 15 years of grief, 15 years of guilt, 15 years believing her son was dead because of her, and he was alive. Alive and whole and walking toward her with tears streaming down his face. She met him at the palace steps. They stood 3 feet apart, mother and son, strangers who shared blood and history and loss. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. Is it really you? Alara nodded, not trusting her voice. Then she stepped forward and pulled him into an embrace with her one good arm. He held her like she might disappear. They stood there crying in the courtyard while Vex and Garrett politely looked away. When Theron released her, he turned to Vex. The old guard who'd spent 15 years protecting him stood rigid, waiting for judgment from the prince he'd saved, but could never tell the truth. Theron stepped forward and embraced him. Thank you, he whispered, for giving me a life, for giving me a chance to know who I really am. Vex's composure finally broke. The man who'd endured torture, exile, and 15 years of being called a traitor, wept openly. I only wish I could have saved your father too, my prince. You saved what mattered most, Theron said. You saved the future. 1 year later, aboard the Wanderer, Alara taught a class of 100 medics from 40 different species. Theron assisted her, having joined the Scar Alliance Medical Corps immediately after their reunion. Vex visited as a diplomat. Emperor Thraxus sent his personal physician to learn human medical techniques. Even Kragath was there, scarred and older but alive, training to become a trauma surgeon. The hegemony embedded 43,000 control chips over 50 years, Alara told her students. We've removed 8,347 so far. That means there are still 34,653 people out there living as slaves without knowing it. Our mission is to find them, free them, teach them that the voices in their heads telling them to hurt others are lies. She held up her left arm, the fingers moving with agonizing slowness, a visible reminder of what she'd sacrificed. Some of you will ask why I cut the chip out myself instead of waiting for surgical removal. The answer is simple. Every second I was under its control was a second I might hurt someone. I chose the pain of freedom over the comfort of slavery. A young Silvari medic raised her hand. Your Majesty, they say you could have stayed hidden on Earth. You'd spent 15 years safe. Why did you come back? Alara thought about that question. About 37 refugees in a bunker. About a human sergeant who fell from the sky. About 8,000 slaves freed from invisible chains. About a son she thought was dead holding her while she cried. Because 37 people needed me, she said finally. Then 8,000, then millions. A crown is just metal. A title is just words. But a scalpel? A scalpel can free minds. A scalpel can cut chains that no one else can see. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is show people that even chains that live inside your skull can be broken if you're brave enough to reach for the blade. The class ended. The students filed out. Alara stood at the viewport, looking out at the stars, at the vast universe that still held so many people trapped in invisible prisons. Captain Holloway joined her. "Ready for the next mission, Your Majesty?" She smiled. "How many times do I have to tell you? It's just Alara now." "With respect, ma'am, you'll always be Your Majesty to us. You earned that title twice. Once when you were crowned, and once when you chose to cut yourself free rather than be someone's weapon." Alara looked at her reflection in the viewport, saw the scars on her neck, saw the weakness in her left arm, saw the gray hair and the lines around her eyes, saw all the marks that life had left on her. And for the first time in 20 years, she saw herself. Not Experiment 1, not the Widow Queen, not a janitor hiding from her past, just Alara Ravencroft. Medic, mother, queen, survivor. "All right then, Captain Holloway," she said. "Let's go find more people who need saving." The Wanderer turned away from Silvari space, heading deeper into the galaxy. Behind them, the Scar Alliance grew stronger every day. Ahead of them, 34,000 people still lived as slaves without knowing it. But they would know soon. Because Alara Ravencroft had learned something important during 15 years of running and hiding and believing she was a monster. The strongest chains weren't made of metal. They were made of lies. Lies about who you were, what you'd done, what you deserved. And the best way to break chains wasn't with strength. It was with truth, with a steady hand, with a blade sharp enough to cut through deception and find the person hiding underneath. They tried to make her a weapon. She'd become a healer. They tried to make her a slave. She'd freed an empire. They'd asked what kind of queen she wanted to be, and she'd shown them. The kind who heals.